what do we pay attention to? What do we see? How much do we pay attention to? Or how little do we pay attention to? And it's a fascinating piece. You know, this is some of the latest brain research has shown that we cannot multitask. We use the term culturally, but the reality is we're incapable of multitasking. We can focus on one thing at a time and one thing only. What we can do is we can do what's called switching, which means we can focus on this thing and quickly switch to this thing and then switch back. But here's the trade-off. For everything you switch, you drop in your attention. So if you can focus on one thing with 100% of your attention, and you switch between two, now you're at 90 to 80% for each one. In other words, because your mind knows you're switching, it won't let you fully focus on any one of the two things you're switching. If you're switching between three things, you start dropping in the attention level. So the more things you're switching through at once, the less you can concentrate on anything because your mind won't let you because it knows you're going to want to switch. And some people are fast switchers and some people are slow switchers. So we think we're multitasking when we're really switching, but the reality is that we're doing, the more we're switching, the less we're doing well what we switch between. Where this is getting interesting is in driving cars. So it used to be that the absolute worst thing you could do is drive drunk. And part of why that was bad is what alcohol does is it impairs your ability to actually concentrate on one thing. It forces you to be constantly switching, and you're switching so much that you lose physical capabilities because you just cannot focus on any one thing. Well, in the past couple of years, guess what has surpassed driving drunk as riskier? Well, texting has become the number one riskiest thing. Number two is a cell phone. But what's interesting is as a result of the phones, there's been studies done, and what they found is if you're listening to music while driving a car, guess what? You're switching, and your concentration is lower. If you're having a conversation, the number of times I've made a wrong turn because I'm having a conversation with my wife while driving is countless. You know, you're driving along and we're trying to have this conversation. Oh, that was our exit. You know, and even if we have the little lady in the box talking to us, exiting 2 miles, you get caught in the concentration because you're either focused on the road, focused on the box, or focused on the wife or the kids. But what they're finding is that conversations can be just as distracting while driving. The phone, texting, all of those things take away our ability to focus. And what's interesting is that we can overfocus and we can underfocus. So that experiment was actually about what do we see in life around us. And sometimes we overfocus and miss. So when you overfocus, you don't see the gorilla. Or you underfocus and you see the gorilla, but you get the count wrong. Make sense? And it's interesting, it's intriguing, because that's part of our challenges is as we walk through life, what do we see, what don't we see, and do we miss the things happening around us, or do we only see some of the things happening around us and not see all of them? How are we journeying through life? This is part of the issues in this passage that we have in Luke's gospel for today. And part of the passage is a conflict between Jesus and a religious leader over, are you understanding how God sees life and what's important to God? Is really what's going on. And a parallel to this was a lesson I learned a few years back when I did a ride-along with an Oshkosh police officer, which I always encourage people, if you've got the time, do it. Ask for a ride-along. It's free to the public, and they'll take you for 2 or 3 hours on a patrol. And there's stuff about Oshkosh you will learn that's really neat, and there's stuff about Oshkosh you will learn that you really don't want to know. But you'll get a better feel for the community and what's going on in the community. And so I'm on a ride-along, and one of the things we had was school patrol, so we were parked on 9th Avenue, and I got to hold the radar gun and radar the cars going by for the police officer, and I'm thinking, the power, yay! And when I did radar a woman driving by that he was going to pull out and ticket, before he did it, though, he said this. He said, look,
just being here is enough to help people remember what to pay attention to, because what's going on is usually they're speeding. Rarely do you find a person who gets behind the wheel of a car and says, I'm going to speed because I want to break the law. You know, it's not why we do it. Why we do it is we're distracted, not paying attention. And he said, look, that is probably a mother. She might be a single mother. She might be married, but she's a working mother. She may have gotten up late. The kids may not have cooperated. Got them dropped off at school late. The kids were crabby, fighting. She's running late. She's trying to put makeup on, drive to work, get there on time because things have not gone right. And here she's driving through a school zone at a significantly bad speed. I'm not going to give her a ticket where she has to pay a fine because I'm pretty sure she's probably having a crappy day. She looks like it in her body language, but I'm going to pull her over to remind her that we have these rules of the road, not because it's your right to ride on these roads. It's a privilege. It's not because it's your right to have a driver's license. It's a privilege. But these roads are here for everybody, and we have to work together to keep everybody safe. So I'm just going to give her a warning to remind her, pay attention to what you're supposed to be paying attention to, which is driving when you're in the car on the road. And he did. Didn't just give her a warning ticket. Enough to say, I realize you're probably having a crappy day, but you know, you just went through a 15-mile-an-hour zone at 40 miles an hour. And there are kids who cross here. Pay attention to the things you need to be paying attention to at the right time. And I thought that was pretty cool, the police officer, because he could have said, oh, you were speeding in a zone, I'm giving you a ticket. Instead he said, you know, this is probably a person having a crappy day. And I'll make it worse by giving him a warning ticket, but it could be a lot worse if I gave him the financial ticket of $100 and some bucks. You know? It's just like, when Kelly and I first got married, we were married in the fall, and so we were living in the Twin Cities, and we wanted to go home to Illinois, where all of our family was in Rockford, for our first Christmas together as a married couple. And we were both working full-time, and Christmas that year was on, Christmas Eve was on Saturday, Christmas was on a Sunday. So as soon as work got done on Friday, we left, about 5.5-hour drive, and got into Rockford probably between 10 and 11 o'clock at night, and spent the night. Well, what happened was, my family had all kinds of traditions. I had some of my own beyond simply my family's and what we did at Christmas time. Kelly's family, she had two sides of the family in town, and each side had their own traditions. And so we got there thinking, all right, we're just going to, you know, kind of decide what we're going to do. And quickly discovered the next morning when we got up that they were expecting us by 11 to help prepare duck, which was a noon Swedish festival for one side of the family. And we were off helping, had the duck meal, and then as soon as we were done with the meal, we were expected at the other side of Kelly's family for a Christmas Eve dinner with its set food. And so we rushed off to that. And then from there, we went to a friend of mine's family who we always spent Christmas with and did Christmas with them, to which we ran back and hooked up with Kelly's parents to go to their 10 o'clock Christmas Eve service, to which we then went to bed, got up, did Christmas with her parents because we were staying at her house, and then had to be over at my parents by 10 o'clock because they wanted Christmas with us before the rest of the relatives came. Did Christmas there. Then the relatives came an hour later, so that we saw them, did Christmas with them, and then had a noon meal, to which we then ran back to the first side of Kelly's family for a meal that happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon so we could do Christmas with that side of the family. And then when we got done with that, we raced over to the other side of the family so that we could do Christmas with them in Christmas Day evening and do another meal with them around 5 o'clock. And then we left and went back to the Twin Cities and said, this was not fun. This was not Christmassy. And we're not coming back next year. And really what happened was all the different sides of the family never put together that us getting married was bringing more families together, and not all the stuff was going to work. And part of it was they were good, meaning good intention. And what they were doing is they saw their tradition as being important and wanted to carry on that tradition and add us to it, but not realizing that the adding us to it necessarily didn't work with all the traditions. In fact, what was happening is that they were losing sight of what mattered was us being together with each other, and were mistaking the actual traditions for being that which made that happen. And it wasn't the tradition that mattered. It was us getting together and caring about each other that mattered. And once they realized that we weren't going to come back the next year, when we did come back the year after that, everything was different. Because they realized, it's not. The rituals weren't as important as we thought. It was the people. Just like that officer realized, okay, we have these laws over the rules of the road, and I can enforce the laws if the law is everything, or I can realize these are real people and try and help them remember to stay focused on the things you need to be focused on. And in a sense, what our traditions, what laws are supposed to be doing, is focusing on what's supposed to be focused on. And here is a story of this exact same thing happening. Jesus walks into the synagogue, he's doing some teaching, and while he's teaching, a woman who has been bent over, crippled for 18 years because of an evil spirit comes in. He calls to her and says, "You are set free," touches her, and she is healed. And right away, what is the response? She praises God, which is awesome. But the religious leader, the head of the synagogue, starts saying, "Whoa, back the truck up. This is the Sabbath, God's day. You don't do work on the Sabbath. Healing is a work. We do healing. We have professional healers who come in and heal in God's name and help people out, and they work the other 6 days of the week. What are you doing?" And it's not that I don't think the head of the synagogue was sitting there saying, "Oh, he's a bad person. I got to go wreck him," as much as he knows this is the Sabbath. This is God's day. We set aside this day to focus our whole being on God and on each other in real, living, vibrant relations. And he was concerned that the rules weren't being met. He was concerned. He was so focused on the Sabbath has to be the Sabbath, because the rules is what God looks for, us following those rules, us holding to those rules, us getting those traditions right, us getting those things right. This is kind of the same conversation that's been happening in churches. I got in this the other day with someone about contemporary music. "Oh, I like the good old hymns and the organ. Oh, I like the guitar and the praise music." And I like to say, well, when our Reformed tradition started, we got rid of all music because we thought it was of the devil. And then we wisened up and added music back into worship. But when the piano came along, we said, that's an instrument of the devil. When the organ came along, we said, that's the instrument of the devil. When the electric guitar came along, we said, that's the instrument of the devil. And we have a long history of claiming all musical instruments as being of the devil at some point, except maybe the harp. That was a joke. We'll just let that one go. But here, Jesus is in this setting, healing this woman, and the religious leader gets upset, and the first thing he does is he points out the hypocrisy. He says, "Look, don't you go into your barn and get your animals out and take them to water? Well, we've invented buckets. You can put a bucket of water in with the animal. If you're taking the Sabbath serious, you set up your animals so they have food for 2 days and water for 2 days, so you can let them be in the barn and not tend to them." And instead they weren't. They were taking their animals, taking them to water, so they were doing things that were work by law on the Sabbath. And Jesus says, don't you work on the Sabbath? And showing the hypocrisy that they choose what parts of the law they follow and they choose what parts they don't, because what they've done is they've elevated law and tradition to be the wrong thing. In other words, they're no longer tools to help people relate to people, but they're tools used to impress God and to actually push people away. I've been in churches that use the Bible as a deity, that worship the Bible as if the Bible were God, and use the Bible to say who can come in and be a part of the church and who can't be a part of the church, and miss that the Word of God is not about a set of rules that keep people in and out, but is supposed to be a guide to help us relate to God and one another, so that in all we do, we grow in relationship to other people and to God, always at the same time. You cannot grow closer to God without growing closer to other people. You cannot grow closer to other people without God growing closer to you in that very thing. And sometimes we miss that. I get bothered by an overemphasis on piety as if I can become really close to God in and by myself, because when you read the Word of God, it doesn't say that. It says we come closer to God through our serving of other people, giving ourselves over to other people, letting other people into our lives and they letting us into theirs. That's why when Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? Love God with all you are and love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say be kind to your neighbor. Didn't say be friendly to your neighbor. Don't drive on their lawn. You know, what did he say? He said love your neighbor. That's a relational term. That's a powerful, complicated relational term. And sometimes it can be a lot of work to do it. It's not always easy to love people. But Jesus says, love God with all that you are and love your neighbor as yourself are the center of what God is about, what the law is about. In other words, the law and traditions, as Jesus is showing us in this, is that they're there to point us toward people. And in his healing of this woman, he's restoring her to community, restoring her to people. He's taking her from being bent over, hunched over, and limited in what she could do, to being able to fully embrace life and the community that she's a part of. I mean, it's a good news passage. It's a powerful passage. It's a disturbing passage because it makes us struggle with how do we think about our traditions? How do we think about our rituals? How do we think about the laws in our life? You know, I've been to churches that want to use the Bible to say the world is black and white, there is no gray. And that becomes dangerous because it blocks God out. Because God's a living God. And you cannot contain God that way. And Jesus gets that God is a living God. And here Jesus is trying to help this leader of the synagogue see that God is a living God. What's really neat is the last line in this passage, which is the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things he was doing. That once he pointed out, look, don't you take your animals out of the barn and give them water, which is technically work on the Sabbath, and all of a sudden he realized, you're right. Maybe the law is supposed to help us relate to people, and he just helped us relate to this woman. And it's not about us getting hung up on who's following the law and who's not following the law, but getting how all of God's law is supposed to draw us toward one another and help us build relationships with one another. And here is Jesus, our living God, showing us it's about people. And it's about care. And it's about serving. And it's about connecting. And it's about growing closer. And maybe that is the challenge he gives us in this. Knowing that the people saw it, got it, and rejoiced in that moment. And that we too can be a part of connecting with others. And that's what we're called to be as Christ's followers. Let us pray.